Thank you, Flavia. Can you hear me okay? Great. And is Daisy pulling up the slides, or do you want me to do that?
Either. We were going to give you the power.
Okay, so let me just, hopefully this will
We're
work.
happy to put it up.
Hold on one second. If this doesn't work, then you will have to.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, can you see the slides?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. It's wonderful to be here with you guys tonight and have a chance to chat with you about our experience, which is ever evolving. I've set my timer, so, but certainly Flavia or Daisy, you can interject as if we go over time. Thank you again. This is the first time that we have talked about this, and hopefully we'll both be we'll both be good as we progress. But we've learned a lot on our journey, so it really is a privilege and an honor to be able to share a little bit about what we've learned. So I'm going to start out, and I'll get Alex to interject as we go along. So that's me and my daughter Alex, and hopefully I can move these slides along. Let's just see. There we go. Okay, so we're going to start this presentation with a miracle, which is kind of a crazy way to start a presentation, but we'll work back. We'll work back from here, and hopefully by the end of it, you'll understand why it is a miracle for us. On December 8th of last December 8th, 2020, I got a call from a geneticist who's based in Boston, and you'll hear a bit more about this. And he told me that I had the MUC1 gene. And that kind of, which is a genetic kidney deformity, in fact. But it was like the best news. It was the best news, one of the best things I'd ever heard. And there's lots of reasons for that. We're going to talk about that and why it was such a miracle. And it was a special day in our family as well. So the call coming on that date was really special. Maybe I'll talk about that at the end, but not now. And so we're gonna move forward. On that call on December 8th, it was a scheduled call, and I made sure that Alex was available to be part of that call with me. So we both have our own experience to share with respect to that. We'll just go to the next slide. So for a long time, I mean, ever since I was a child, we knew that we had familial nephritis, and I say that in air quotes, because it really doesn't mean very much. It means that there's kidney disease in the family, and that's about all it means. And so when I say in the family, we know of 4 generations. We suspect 5, and probably we went back much further than that. My father, Blaine, was diagnosed in 1972 when I was just a kid, like a young child. And that was early days, as you can imagine. We lived in Ontario, in kind of northern Ontario, not like north, but up near Collingwood, if you guys know where that is. So north of Toronto, a couple hours north of Toronto. And when my dad had his kidney transplant diagnosis, he was quite ill. It was a sudden diagnosis, and he was on dialysis for a few years, and then had his transplant in 1975, which is another miracle in itself, because he had that for 31 years and just passed away in 1996. So that was an incredible, just incredible miracle in and of itself, that in those days that we would have him for that much longer with a deceased transplant. They rarely did living donor transplants in those days. And then after my dad was diagnosed, my grandfather was diagnosed. So he was actually diagnosed after my dad in about 1975. And he had an attempted transplant a couple of years later, which he did not survive the transplant. But again, those were early days. And at the time, we were told that it is not genetic, that there was a reason my dad had it, because he'd had red measles as a child, and my grandfather had fought in World War II and had some injuries. And so it was just special circumstances that meant that it wasn't a genetic thing. And that's what we were always told. So fast forward quite a few years later, almost 30 years later. And I had been told, as I mentioned, that this was not genetic, but I I'm kind of a proactive person, and I believe in being as cautious and clear as you can be. So I had asked to be that I get a referral to a nephrologist, even though I was just seeing a GP, and I really didn't have any. I had no signs of any kidney problems, and it actually took me about 4 years to convince my GP to send me to a nephrologist, and because he didn't think there was anything wrong. So by the time I went to a nephrologist, I expected to get cleared and him to say to me, why are you here? Why are you bothering me? Why are you wasting my time? But instead he said, your kidneys show scarring. They're not functioning as they should be for you at 32, and you will someday need a transplant. And he told me that all in the first meeting. So, but it was another, it wasn't until, about another 12 years that my kidneys actually did fail, and I had a transplant in 2010. The picture there is my donor. And because it was a familial, because at this point they thought, okay, this isn't circumstance anymore. There's a reason why this is passing the generations. And so they wouldn't look at anyone in my family because they didn't know, they couldn't test for it. So my husband's sister came forward, and she was a match. And I had a living donor transplant. It was not preemptive, but we tried to make it preemptive, but it wasn't, in 2010. So that's been, 11 years now. And it's been, I've been really good since then. And then, just shortly after, I was gone through my issue and felt like everything was good. My daughter, Alexandra, was diagnosed at a very young age, even younger than my dad. Because he was diagnosed at, obviously at 32. Alex, who's on the call here, was diagnosed at 30. So it was quite young. And it was hard. She ended up having a preemptive living donor transplant in 2017, and she'll talk about that a little bit. There's her donor, who was actually, again, non-related, because we did not know the genetic cause of the disease. And that is her husband's aunt who stepped forward to be her donor. And then my Alex is my middle daughter, and Mackenzie is my eldest daughter. She has shown signs of kidney problems. She's currently in stage 3, so she's holding her own at this point, but she will for sure someday need a transplant, probably in the next couple of years. And then, my dad was the eldest of 4 boys. They all ended up having kidney disease and having transplants, and none of them are alive right now. The last one died last year. I've heard from a first cousin who also has kidney problems. And so obviously it's extremely pervasive. And so we, again, being extremely proactive, I wanted to get to the bottom of this. I wanted to understand who it was going to affect. At this point, we only knew that Alex had it. And so there's my daughters, Mackenzie on the left, Carly's the youngest in the middle, and Alex is on the right. This was actually on one of our road trips to get to when we started the genetic testing in Toronto. And we went down a couple of times together and went through a little bit of testing. And, part of our questions at the time were, could one of Alex's sisters be a donor? And the answer to that was no, because we didn't know what, they couldn't identify the gene, so we didn't know who might have it down the road. The Mount Sinai Genetic Testing Center where we went, they did have 3 samples from my 3 uncles and 2 cousins, but they weren't allowed to tell me that because they had to have permission from them to compare them. So we didn't know that at the time. They did run us through every known gene at the time and found nothing. So, we were happy to be involved in the testing, and we were happy to go through that. It was disappointing to learn that they didn't know, what was causing it or who would have it. And of course, for us, and for me, my kids were getting older, in their late 20s and early 30s. And what would happen if they decided that they wanted to have children? I mean, that was a big concern, obviously, for us. And that's where I'm going to pass it over to Alex, because she can tell this story about what her options were at the time, again, not knowing whether, what kind of genetic, propositions were there. I'm going to turn it over to you, Alex.
Thanks, Mom, and thanks, Flavia, for your introduction. I'm really happy to be here. So I guess this brings us to my piece. So as Mom said, I was actually discovered a high creatinine reading at just a yearly annual checkup. It was mid-high, I think around 125, at which point I was referred to MCKC, and discovered that I was in early stage kidney failure. So I think at the time I was about 27. And it was quite devastating for me because I had been in a serious relationship. We had been planning marriage, and that's right around the time that you start to think about children. And for me, being a mom was a dream. It was something I always wanted for my life. And it felt a little bit like a sentence on my life or my future. And so in those early meetings, I remember Mom coming with me and telling me it's very important that you talk about these things and your hopes and dreams for the future. And I remember the doctors telling me it was possible, but that most importantly, they wanted my native kidney function to last as long as possible. And so having Mom's experience as sort of the only predictor of how mine could look, it didn't look like I would be months or even years away from a total kidney failure. And so I was in a place of feeling kind of torn between wanting to put off thinking about dialysis or transplant and hoping that I wouldn't be there for some time as Mom, but another piece knowing that that would likely close my window to have my own children. So luckily or unluckily for me, my kidney disease progressed quickly. Within that first year and a half, we were talking about preemptive transplant, living donor transplant. And that was because I had Mom by my side to make me aware of these things, that they were possible, and to ask those questions. And so I remember feeling scared, but also hopeful that maybe I could have, a new life and that more possibilities would open up. I also remember in one of those early meetings, Mom introduced me to the living donor transplant coordinator who she knew through her kidney connections in the kidney community. And I remember sitting down with her, and she talked about a friend that she knew that had had a transplant, who had had 3 children after a transplant. And I always remembered that conversation and just that little piece of hope that that gave me, which is why it's such an honor for me to be involved in the Transplant Ambassador program, where talking about the possibility, seeing life after transplant in real people, in real stories is really an honor, because I know what a difference it made for me. So fast forward, I had my transplant a month after I turned 30. I knew that my doctors wanted me stabilized on my transplant medication for a year prior to transitioning to transplant medication that was safe for pregnancy. So it was carefully planned. I did very well after my transplant. I returned to work after 8 weeks. And within the year, the next July, we adjusted my medication to be safe for pregnancy. I was planning my wedding, which was in August, and I found out the week of my wedding that I was pregnant. So I had a good, healthy pregnancy. I had excellent prenatal care. There were complications, of course. I knew it was a high-risk pregnancy, but I had my first healthy baby on the 31st of March, 2019, Liam. And so about 5 months postpartum, I was in kidney clinic for a checkup and asked if I wanted any more children. Well, I had said yes, and they told me sooner rather than later, because adjustments to transplant meds were risky. And so A year later, we had Connor, a second healthy pregnancy, a second healthy baby. So I now have two babies, one just over 2 and one just over 1. And it's quite remarkable. I was always told from the get-go that it was a 50-50 chance that I would pass on the genetic abnormality to my children. And I was even questioned in those early days about whether or not I wanted to do that, whether or not it could stop with me. And as we continue, I think Mom will talk about this. I made the decision to go ahead and have my children. Seeing my mom's life after transplant was full, seeing my life after transplant was full, and knowing that if my children went through this, they would have incredible support and lived experience behind them. So that's sort of, I guess, where I'll end for now.
Thanks, Al. And I think I remember that Alex did get a lot of questions from caregivers who asked her, are you sure you want to have children? That happened a lot. And after one of those meetings, I asked her, I said, you know, how do you feel about them asking you that all the time, if you should have children? And her quote was, as I put on the slide, well, if you knew I would have kidney disease, would you have had me? And of course, there was a resounding yes to that. So we never talked about that question again. Anyway, so well, I'll flip through the last few slides really quickly. This young lady, who is like extremely young, is a lady by the name of Dr. Dervla Connaughton, who arrived in London last year, actually only about last January. She was the first genetic nephrologist who had arrived in our area, and the first thing she wanted to do was to test our family. And you know, we'd gone through testing and they'd found nothing, and so, you know, I thought, okay, you know, we'll do what you want us to do. She did identify that she'd come from Ireland and that she'd involved in some international studies, including one in Boston where they had identified these 2 particular genes, and it was the only place in the world that were testing for these genes. So I thought, okay, well, we're gonna follow you down this path again. And so it really, since last January when we met her, we've moved forward with testing that has gone across the border, saliva testing specifically, because blood was hard to get across the border. It was taking a long time, and that's when I got that call on December 8th, 2020, from Dervla initially, Dr. Connaughton, and then the fellow this Dr. Tony Blair, who runs the research study program at the Broad Institute, and said that you've been, you know, confirmed to have this MUC1 genetic disease. And it was incredibly positive. It was a very positive thing, and I really did not expect that they would find that in us, because we'd not had success up until that date. And really quickly, MUC1 is, again, Alex mentioned, it's a 50% chance of passing it along. It is what they call autosomal dominant. So if you don't inherit it, you can't pass it on. But if you do inherit it, 50% of your children will inherit it. There's only 200 families are known across in the world to have this gene, but they do believe it's much more widespread than that, even though it's still a rare disease, because they've only just learned how to test for it. The good news and the most exciting news that we were so thrilled about is that they're already working on a cure, a compound, a drug that has been completely effective in mice in terms of eradicating the mutated cells. So this diagram is just showing the green cells is really the extra protein that this gene causes, that builds up in the cells and causes the scarring. And then this is a normal kidney on the right, abnormal kidney on the left. In the middle is what happens after this compound is given, and it really stops this protein from building up in the kidney. So not only did they find the gene, but they are actually well on their way to a cure for it, which is just, you know, pretty unbelievable. This is my second last slide. Here is Mackenzie and Alex up in the top. When they were born, of course, I I never thought that they would be going through this. But you know, they are. Here's Alex's little boys, Liam and Connor, who will have a cure, you know, which is, you know, crazy. It's a good thing that this is the last slide because now you understand why that was such a miracle for us to hear about that. Alex, over to you. If you're able to talk.
Thanks, Mom. Yeah, so I had the call, I think, in January. I mean, once Mom knew, I pretty much knew, but it wasn't until last month when we attended Dr. Blair's seminar that I, you know, about MUC1 and learned about the cures on the horizon, that I really choked up, because I for the first time, you know, while I had reasoned that we would get through whatever would come for my children, for the first time, I really felt that there was a real, very real possibility that they will have treatment that isn't limited to dialysis or transplant. So it's incredible. I'm not sure that it's quite sunk in after even a few months. The other thing about MUC1 is that it is almost always adult onset. They won't test my boys until they're 18, but they've assured me that it's very, very rare and unlikely that they would have any signs or symptoms of kidney failure before then. The fact that my kidneys failed so early, I do really attribute to a miracle, because I wouldn't have had my boys, I'm sure, had I had, you know, 5 or 10 years with my native kidneys. And so while the cure isn't, you know, for Mom or for me, I believe that it happened for a reason, and I'm so very grateful for it all.
What an incredible story, Susan and Alex. It really does give such hope to other families. And so I would just like to take some time for questions.